abominable. It's disgraceful that the Biden administration would allow a U.S. citizen to be killed in a Ukrainian prison. It was the whole pretext for his arrest was that he was broadcasting on his podcast views that were inconvenient truths, I guess, against the Zelensky regime because they didn't want anyone to know that there's actual merit to the Russian side.
Prove to me that you are alive.
So, I have a couple more questions. Again, I cannot thank you enough. In your expertise, everything that you know in life, everything that you have read, everything that you have studied, what is your opinion and if you would entertain this prophecy, like, are we truly headed towards a World War III, a nuclear war, or are we hopefully around the corner to a peace deal?
Again, I've been very happy to see what I've seen from Russia since this unfortunate escalation on the part of the Biden administration, authorizing 8 ATACMS missile strikes deep inside Russian territory in Bryansk and Kursk. Because what I've seen is they've expressed a willingness to negotiate a peace agreement that on better terms for Ukraine and the West than what was offered by President Putin in, I think it was either July or June 14th earlier this year, in which he stated that peace could only be achieved along the constitutional borders of the 4 Russian annexed oblasts of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Luhansk, and Donetsk. So now that Russia is saying, going back to Putin's original proposal of September 2022, that peace can be achieved along the current line of control, that we have in the war. So Russia would Ukraine would recognize continued Russian control of the territory that Russia has retaken, and I think that's the easiest way to end the war. Is all Ukrainian troops pulled out of Kursk, all Russian troops pulled out of Kharkiv, and then the current borders of those 4 oblasts as based on the battle lines, and then demilitarized zone established similar to the one we have separating North and South Korea, that would be patrolled not by NATO troops. I think that's very provocative, but of course by OSCE or probably better UN peacekeepers. But that, as well as former Russian President Medvedev's statement that he doesn't want to see this escalate to the nuclear level, to me shows that Putin still is not going to take the bait. He's not going to take the bait from Biden to escalate the nuclear level. We're not likely to see a nuclear war between Russia and a NATO breakout before Trump takes office. There is a continued possibility of conventional Russian attacks on NATO targets. Probably nothing too major. Definitely not something on Brussels, I think. But just to show that Russia means business, and they're not going to take this anymore. I'm hopeful that won't happen. I think it's much more likely we'll see increased IRBM strikes on other Ukrainian targets, particularly in Kyiv, and that could potentially include the presidential palace. Putin has ordered that Ukrainian political and military leadership are not to be targeted. On the other hand, we've seen that Ukraine arguably or reportedly has been trying to target even as high as the Russian Minister of Defense. So if that's the case, Putin could take the gloves off and say, okay, you try to target our Minister of Defense, we'll target yours, and Russia has the means to kill high value targets in Ukraine's political and military leadership, up to and including Zelensky. So I think that's the greater risk we'll see. And that's obviously from the U.S. perspective, that's a much more preferable escalation than even a conventional military attack against NATO that could potentially involve the U.S. in a direct war with the Russian Federation.
Yeah, I got a couple more questions. I'll promise I'll get you out of here. I remember when Tucker Carlson was interviewing Putin, and Putin said something interesting about the leadership of the United States. He said it doesn't matter if it's Biden or Trump because there is what we call now a deep state that's ruling the country, and we know that we have legal lobbyists in Washington, and we sort of know how some policies are getting passed and things like that. What do you think? Do you think that how much power do you think Trump truly has in this situation? Is there a chance that someone above him will press him to continue this nonsense and lunacy?
No, there's no chance that there's no one that's going to be above Trump. He's not going to take orders from any deep state. I mean, the deep state are trying to kill him. They've tried. I've written on this that they've tried to assassinate him twice. The FBI and the Secret Service, moles and within have been likely under orders by someone in the Biden administration. We don't know how high it goes. Could go all the way to the top for all we know. Have wanted to see him assassinated. So, having been shot in the head by an assassin's bullet, by an assassin likely, aided by the deep state, for the primary reasons that Trump wants peace with Russia, and that's not what the deep state wants. Continued war. They want continued war in Ukraine in perpetuity and in pursuit of the expansion of America's liberal empire, as well as, of course, Trump's plans to fire all the corrupt Biden and Obama FBI and Department of Justice officials. Trump's not, he's not going to give up his plan for peace with Russia and Ukraine. The only possibility is that, Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, who he's appointed as, two of his cabinet picks, and along with a few others, could persuade him to present Putin with terms that are unrealistic and unacceptable for Russia, that would not be sufficient to cause Russia to accept a permanent ceasefire. I think it's more likely that Russia would accept a permanent ceasefire while those negotiations are underway. So I think that the risks of Russia not agreeing to a ceasefire are very minimal. Russia has been trying to implement unilateral ceasefires. I think it was at the end of 2022, maybe at the end of 2023, when they had a unilateral 36-hour ceasefire that Ukraine repudiated and continued to fight Russia and bomb Russian positions. So I think the chances are low, extremely low, that Trump will not pursue peace with Russia.
I really, I appreciate you saying that because I appreciate that you have that much faith in Donald Trump, and I think whole of America, we showed this election that we want to have this faith in President Trump. To sidetrack just a little bit, but kind of still stay on the subject. I wore this hat today for a reason. Alex Jones. You can feel whatever you feel about Alex Jones, but a few days ago, he made a movie about an American journalist and writer that was supposedly killed in a Ukrainian prison. His name was Gonzalo Lira. David, do you have any thoughts on that? How was this possible? How was it possible that an American, be he a journalist or a writer or whatever, dies in a Ukrainian prison? Ukraine was supposed to be a strategic partner, a colony, whatever. How is this possible? What kind of times are we living in? And are you aware of this whole story?
I am. Yeah, it's absolutely abominable. It's disgraceful that the Biden administration would allow a U.S. citizen to be killed in a Ukrainian prison. It was the whole pretext for his arrest was that he was broadcasting on his podcast views that were inconvenient truths, I guess, against the Zelensky regime, because they didn't want anyone to know that there's actual merit to the Russian side, to their war, rationales for the war. Just as I say this all the time: Ukraine is fighting a just war of self-defense against Russian aggression, but Russia is also fighting a just war of self-defense against NATO aggression. So both sides are fighting just wars. There's been some low-level war crimes on both sides, but they both have just causes. So, but we need to recognize that in the West. We only hear the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian and Biden regime propaganda are, we're indoctrinated that. Not as much as we used to. And at the beginning of the war, you only heard one side. Now you hear a little bit more, of the Russian side, because Trump is a foreign policy realist. And of course, the whole rationale for him wanting peace with Russia is because Russia does have legitimate security interests. He recognizes that, and he wants to kind of split the difference and have, a compromise peace agreement. But it's absolutely disgraceful that Biden allowed that. Clearly, Zelensky, I wouldn't call him go so far as to call him a U.S. puppet, but he is certainly the leader of what is essentially a U.S. military protectorate or satellite state. And so he would never do something like this unless he knew that the Biden administration would approve, or at least look the other way from the Ukrainian decision to either murder or create the circumstances under which he would die in prison.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Because I think it's important for us to stand up for Americans, and to show the world that we care, to show the world that we are still the United States. You can't just take any American, going overseas and then them disappearing because they said something you didn't like. So I appreciate you. I'm gonna ask you a last question. And before we go, again, I cannot thank you enough. Please make sure you send me all the links you would like me to plug in to the description for people to possibly get in touch with you. You are a true hero, because you are one of these people that are trying to bring us, the correct information, trying to bring us, the other side of the truth. So again, I'm gonna keep thanking you. David, are we the world and the United States, will we celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas this year and so on? And it's a two-part question. And what would you like to leave us with, and the audience?
Well, I think certainly we'll see Thanksgiving, Christmas. We can't be sure, but I'm confident that the world's going to hold together. Won't see a world war before Trump. I will say I'm confident we won't see it before Trump becomes president, because I think there's also a threat from China we haven't discussed that could lead to that potentially. Most likely not, but there's always a possibility. But I would say that please pray for peace. And, to all American citizens watching today, please contact your members of Congress and urge them to support the peace plan that I've been pushing on my Real War newsletter, my peace proposals that began with the national interests as a columnist for them. But that, particularly my latest article, I think it was written in August, that talks about how Trump can win the war in 24 hours. It's a short eight-item peace plan that I think Putin could accept, and I think it could end the war within days after Trump takes office. So, ask all your viewers to please go to my Real War Substack at dpyne.substack.com and subscribe, and so you can be aware of all my latest national security updates.
Do you still have a couple of minutes left? Because this peace plan, you said an 8-piece, can you break that? That's so interesting. What would that look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously it starts with neutrality for Ukraine. I think there's one point that Russia might be willing to compromise on, and that is we could keep Ukraine U.S. or Western aligned, either as a non-NATO, a major non-NATO ally, or something along those lines. Essentially, where the U.S. would have, West would have security guarantees to defend Ukraine in case of future Russian aggression, which I don't think would ever materialize if they signed a peace agreement along these lines. But the level of Russian or U.S. military assistance would be far lower because it would be within the limits of the partial demilitarization of Ukraine. So that would be a second point. Would be Ukraine would have to disarm essentially to have its weapons be under at least kind of at the max limits of the current German army. German army is well armed, but it's not especially well armed. So. And then the size of the Ukrainian military would have to be reduced to 1/2 of its pre-war level. So it would be around 100,000 regular army troops, another 50,000 border guards. Within those numbers, 150,000. Within the 100,000 would be also, of course, Ukrainian Air Force, Ukrainian Navy. So ground forces might be about 65,000, maybe 70,000 total. And this would reduce the threat to Russia. So if thing about Putin that people don't realize is Putin only attacks when he's threatened. If there is a threat that one of his Russia's neighbor states are going to become a NATO member, Putin potentially attacks those countries. If they remain neutral or aligned with Russia, as in the case of Belarus, no attacks. Kazakhstan, nothing like we've seen no aggression at all. We've seen nothing but cooperation with every other former Soviet republic. So, I think those are important principles. We'd also see two of the principles that I tacked on at the end, which are optional, essentially, point 7 and 8, are that, the U.S. would agree to a policy of non-interference in Russian affairs as well as former Soviet affairs. So for any Soviet republic, we would not try to overthrow their regimes. We would not try to get them to become Western allies. So none of that. And in return, Russia would commit to a policy of non-interference in the Western Hemisphere. So this is I proposed kind of a sphere of influence agreement beginning in 2019 between the U.S. and Russia and perhaps China as well, in which we agreed to stay out of, stay out of their spheres of influence. Essentially, Russia has a Monroe Doctrine. We need to recognize that Russia has their own Monroe Doctrine, and this war in Ukraine is essentially being fought because we violated their Monroe Doctrine by trying to expand NATO into Ukraine, which is the most populous former Soviet republic outside of Russia. So it's the most important, and that's why it's a nuclear red line for Russia that could cause us to get into World War III. So that would be key as well. Russia or Ukraine would drop all of its sanctions, both diplomatic and economic and trade against Russia. So they kind of free trade would be restored. The U.S. would also have to drop all of its sanctions. The U.S. would have a free trade treaty with Russia. Essentially, we would have what I call a new Russo-American entente that would be modeled on the Anglo-French entente of 1904 to 1914. So it wouldn't be a military alliance, but it would be kind of a strategic partnership where we would cooperate, we would be friendly, we would exchange dual-use military technology, perhaps even missile defense technology. Putin once talked about a potential joint missile defense system between the U.S. or between Russia and NATO. I think that would be very productive. There would also be a withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Eastern Europe. So all our troops would be withdrawn to pre-1999 NATO borders. So principally Germany, Italy, and Turkey, essentially, but we would leave Eastern Europe. No troops in Finland, no troops in Poland, Romania, any state that bordered on the Russian Federation. All those troops would be withdrawn from the U.S. side. We have 20,000 troops, I think, currently. We would also withdraw. Ideally, we would withdraw all 150 non-strategic nuclear weapons, B-61 gravity bombs from Western Europe, and we would redeploy those to Pacific Fleet aircraft carriers. So that would help deter Chinese aggression against Taiwan.
Prove to me that you are alive.
But I think that would help Russia again feel, and we would do that in exchange for Russia to withdraw all nuclear weapons from Belarus and from any Russian annexed areas of Ukraine. So Russia would withdraw all of its troops, military forces from Belarus in exchange for our withdrawal of troops from Eastern Europe. And so we would just kind of pull back. We would escalate. Eastern Europe would essentially become more of wouldn't be neutral, but it would become kind of a buffer zone in that, no U.S. or Russian forces would be present in Eastern Europe. And that's the kind of thinking we need, I think, to establish a just and lasting peace with the Russian Federation that serves the interests of everyone. It serves the interests of Russians. It serves the interests of Americans, Ukrainians, NATO member state populations. And we have this, what Putin has talked about as the indivisibility of security, in which, mutual security, it would essentially be a mutual defense treaty, in which incorporating some of the more positive elements of the mutual defense draft treaties that the Russian Federation offered to the U.S. and NATO in December of 2021. The one with NATO was actually acceptable on its face. I've looked through it. The one with the U.S. had 3 objectionable points that I would, object to and refuse to accept. But we could still, accept everything else. And that would, again, establish a just and lasting peace. It would eliminate the threat of both conventional and nuclear threats, both to NATO member states and the U.S. and Ukraine. So there would be no Russian threat to any Western nation. And we would partner them, trade-wise, to try to kind of peel them off from their military alliance with China. We wouldn't require them to leave their military alliance with China, but we would essentially neutralize it, so that, and one of the parts of the agreement that I specifically stated is that both sides would agree that if there is a war with a third country, that the other side will remain neutral. So if in a war between the U.S. and China, Russia would have to remain neutral. It could not get involved. It couldn't send arms to China, couldn't attack the U.S. Similarly, if Russia were to get involved in a war with Great Britain, we wouldn't. That would be covered by that same treaty. So if Britain were to provoke Russia, or France or Poland would provoke Russia to attack it by being overly militaristic or attacking them first, then the U.S. would stay neutral. Now, of course, if Russia were, to attack a NATO ally in a brazen way unprovoked, then I think that would be negated. We could defend them under those circumstances. But so this would kind of be the reinsurance treaty of 1887 that would be applied, that Germany and Russia had under the same circumstances, to try to avoid the potential for a world war between them. We could do the exact same thing with Russia today. So we have to learn from the lessons of history, and we need to apply them to our relationship with Russia to make it a much more productive, peaceful arrangement, restore, our friendly relations with Russia that we enjoyed during the 1990s. Not just a detente with Russia. We would want a detente with China, but we would have an entente with Russia, where we have actually some level of security cooperation along the lines of Britain and France before World War I.
Hey, any chance you running for president the next time around? Because I'm on board, man.
Yeah, I haven't had any requests for president, but I've had several high-level former, U.S. military officers, one colonel and a brigadier general, that said they hope to see me in Trump's national security.
Yeah, we need people like you, man. We need you, man. Like if we could have people like you in the cabinet, man, next to the president, or being the president, run next time. Look, like we need guys like you, man. If you have a couple more minutes, because you mentioned China, myself personally, again, I'm not an expert, just a regular Joe Schmo with a show. I don't see why everyone is worried about China. To me, China is advancing technologically. They're bettering the country. Some people say they're already in the next century. Like, why are we worried about China at all, militarily speaking?
Well, China has had an objective since 1949, since the proclamation of the People's Republic of China, to unify all ostensibly Chinese territory, including Taiwan, under the rule of the Communist Party of China, the Chinese Communist Party. And that objective is not going away. It's not something they're going to give up. Xi Jinping is, in my estimation, he wants to see full reunification with Taiwan by next year at the latest. And if peaceful means are not an option, he will achieve that through military means, most likely.
Why do we care again? I'm so sorry for interrupting you. Why do we care again? Let them take China. I mean, let them take Taiwan. Why do we care?
Well, Taiwan does provide us with, with advanced semiconductors. I think 80-90% of advanced semiconductors that we purchase or use for our weapons and phones and cars come from Taiwan. And so, that's understandable that we would be concerned about that. But that doesn't mean that we should, risk war with China, because, if we lost these Taiwanese semiconductors, we could maybe take an 8% hit to our economy. But if we were to get in a war situation with China or lose, have them cut off all trade with us, we'd probably take a 15 to 20% hit to our economy, which would be double what we had during the Great Depression, if not more. So, China is, a lot of people don't realize China is not going to stop selling us those semiconductors. They probably raise the prices because they'd have more, not a monopoly, but, kind of a semi-monopoly. So they would raise the prices, but they would keep selling those semiconductors to the U.S. and the West, and we'd have to pay a little more cost, but we wouldn't lose those unless, of course, we implemented, went to war with them, obviously, or we had serious economic sanctions against them that would cause us to cut trade with us. So there's a feeling among most Western security analysts that we have to defend Taiwan for that reason, primarily, but also because Taiwan's got some kind of strategic position. Well, it really isn't that strategic. It's located, 81 miles from the Chinese mainland coast. China essentially controls, the Western Pacific Ocean, because their fleet is the largest navy in the world, the largest Coast Guard. They have the largest dual-capable nuclear missile force by far. They have the largest army, and they've been mobilizing their economy and military for war since April or May of 2022. So they're going to blockade Taiwan, whether we like it or not, by next year, in my opinion. As you stated, that's not something the U.S. should go to war over. I've called on the President-elect Trump to announced strategic clarity for Taiwan, and that making the same pledge that Biden did before Russia invaded Ukraine, which is that the U.S. will not defend Ukraine militarily. Similarly, the U.S. should not defend Taiwan militarily. So we will, even if we send them arms, obviously those arms shipments would stop the day the blockade began, because we wouldn't be able to provide them with weapons or supplies through the blockade unless we tried to break the blockade through force of arms. So at that point, we would be forced to mediate some kind of solution to prevent war, prevent a full-scale war between China and Taiwan that could include the U.S. and its Pacific allies, Japan, and the Philippines, and possibly Australia. I proposed essentially an EU-style confederation agreement, in which China and Taiwan would, become would appear as the same country on a map. They would form what I call a Chinese Union, or a Union of Chinese Republics, on the basis of Deng Xiaoping's proposal of one China, two systems. So they would have two economic systems, two political systems. Taiwan would continue to have democratic elections to elect their own leaders. They continue to have control over the military, but maybe China would have a permanent naval base in southern Taiwan. They would have joint military exercises. They would have kind of a joint defense council that would, govern security matters. They would essentially be allies, for lack of a better term, but would be under the pretense of a unification agreement. So I think that would be acceptable to Chinese leaders. I mean, they've said there's no compromise. It has to be full reunification. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think they're they're very interested in avoiding potential full-scale war with the U.S. that could turn nuclear. So I think that should be, certainly if they blockade Taiwan, that should be our opening proposal on the part of the Trump administration to avoid an all-out war with China. But once they blockade, Taiwan, they're less likely to accept those kind of terms, which are much more favorable to the U.S. and Taiwan than what they're looking for. So it would be in our interest, I think, to propose something along those lines before a military confrontation begins.
Yeah, I like to bring light in tough situations, but all jokes aside, I would urge everyone to start voting people like David Pyne into these seats, major seats politically, because we need people like this, someone that could sit down, talk to us, explain things to us, and someone that has a plan, a sensible plan. Do you think that because from what I'm understanding now and from what it looks like is that we're on a path of war regardless? My question is, do you think it's because the US, like, we cannot deal with the fact that the world is becoming multipolar? Like, is that it?
Yeah, essentially that is it. Biden has stated that he thinks the U.S. is the greatest global superpower or global hegemon in the world. We don't negotiate with even great powers, nuclear peer adversaries. So he's foolish to say such things. It doesn't reflect the world as it currently exists. It's just a fact that the Sino-Russian alliance is more powerful, both in terms of conventional military forces, nuclear forces, economic power, industrial might, particularly military industrial capabilities. They can produce weapons a lot faster than we can. There was a study that showed that the U.S. would run out of long-range precision strike munitions, including air defense missiles, on our warships within 1 week of intense combat operations. So what do we do after that happens? Do we send a carrier with the aircraft without weapons? Do we send ships without missiles to defend themselves into the Chinese, A2, air defense kind of zone where they can bombard us with hypersonic missiles? Obviously, we couldn't do that. We'd have to withdraw outside of the second island chain, essentially, and maybe conduct some long-range airstrikes. So there'd be no point to continuing the war at that point. And then, with regards to NATO, it's well known in expert military circles that NATO only has enough weapons to last 2 weeks. So, other weapons systems that we have would run out in 2 weeks that are not long range precision strike missiles, so munitions. So, Russia has demonstrated capability to essentially wage a war against a major war indefinitely. They produce 4 times more munitions than all 28 EU member states combined. They produce more than the US and the EU combined. In terms of 152 millimeter howitzer munitions and hypersonic missiles, of course, far more than we do, and ballistic and cruise missiles. So you have to look at the world as it really is. That's the key axiom of foreign policy realism, and for restrainers, is that you have to accept the world as is in terms of the actual military balance, not what you want it to be, but as it actually is. So, much as Rumsfeld, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, talked about fighting in Iraq with the army we have, not with the army we want. We wish we had. So, when you look at the world and the fact that that the U.S. would inevitably lose any war with Russia and China, or that we have to avoid it. And we have to do everything we can to avoid it. Right now, we're perilously close to a direct war with Russia, thanks to Biden's escalatory actions. Trump's going to end that. But Inauguration Day can't come any too soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, amen to that. I spoke to someone in Russia yesterday, and they told me they said, "Look, we know that Germany does cars. They do great cars. France does awesome wine and champagne." He's like, "Look, Russia does weapons, man. Like this is what we do." And I think it's something that you just highlighted. David, I will pray for you. You will always be a friend to the show. Please come back. Um, Anything you need from us, you got it. I will push that people like you are in power. And again, if anything changes in the next 4 years and you decide to run, man, I'm on board all the way. So you've been here. I kept you here well over an hour. Now, this time for sure, take us out of here, David. Maybe there's anything else that you would like to share with us. And this is gonna reach, people in Russia and in Ukraine. So, take us out of here, man.
Yeah, again, I just want to express gratitude for you having me on your show. It's been a great discussion, and we covered a lot of areas. But I want to say again, I pray for peace. I love the people of Russia and Ukraine. I'm not supporting either side. I think the U.S. should best remain neutral in the conflict, and we need to mediate a solution which recognizes the legitimate security interests of both nations and ensures a just and lasting peace. Not along the lines that Zelensky stated with a full Russian withdrawal, but recognizing that there are Russian majority populations within Ukraine's former territory, particularly in Crimea, that did legitimately choose and vote to join with the Russian Federation. But Ukraine's security is dependent on peace with Russia. It's we've demonstrated the U.S. is not willing to send any troops to defend Ukraine, even if they were a NATO member state. So that's a dead end for Ukraine. They can't achieve security through affiliation with NATO, only with peace and friendship with the Russian Federation. I think, despite all this war that's killed up to 100,000 Russians, and probably 350,000 Ukrainians, Putin he would be willing to take Ukraine back as a friend with open arms. He doesn't, he views this as essentially a Slavic civil war between Russian and Ukrainian brothers, and that's why he hasn't escalated to try to kill and slaughter Ukrainian civilians, as Zelensky has falsely claimed, as many Western leaders have falsely claimed. Putin's not a perfect guy. He is a dictator, but he is committed. He is a champion of peace, and most people don't believe when I say that. But I've studied him. I'm someone who opposed Putin for most of my life, and then I found out that he proved me wrong. He proved to me that he's not a warmonger like Joe Biden. He proved to me that he wants to have a just peace with Ukraine, and he wants peace with the West. Every time we tried to provoke him to escalate the nuclear level, he's avoided that. When some of his hardline advisors have told him he ought to pop off a couple nukes to reestablish deterrence with the West. So no one's perfect. Both sides have fault. Russia has some fault. Ukraine has some fault. They're both fighting just wars. We need to recognize that there are two sides of any conflict. This war did not appear in a vacuum. There are legitimate reasons it erupted, and sadly, it's former liberal U.S. leaders from George W. Bush to Barack Obama and Joe Biden that really precipitated this conflict with the assistance of UK and French leaders in particular.
Man, you said so many beautiful things throughout this hour and a half, but another beautiful thing that I have to note that you said, that Putin said that we are Slavic brothers. In fact, Putin actually said in the beginning of the escalated conflict in 2022, there's an interview where he says we are one people, meaning Ukrainians and Russians, because he grew up in the Soviet Union. He was educated in the Soviet Union. To him, there's no difference. And to add on to that, there are videos of Putin singing songs in Ukrainian. His goddaughter is from Ukraine. So people need to understand, it's bad. It's like an argument at home, and then someone from another town got involved with it and started pulling your wife to their side, and eavesdropping, all putting all kinds of things in her ear, man. So that's what it is, David. God bless you. You're amazing. Please run for president, man, and you will always be a friend to the show. Thank you so much. All the links will be available in the description. And again, from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of the hearts of all the Americans, Ukrainians, and Russians, keep doing what you're doing, and we got your back. And please come back anytime. Thank you, David.
God bless you as well. Be happy to come back later.
Thank you so much. Oh, happy Thanksgiving and Merry
Thanksgiving to you.
Man. Thank you, David.
Prove to me that you are alive.